This week there'll be no grand intro. I just wanted to say, welcome. I always try to share Terry Carter stuff, but it never really works out. Recently he was in my area, and I was tempted to go and share. It was a gathering of open-minded individuals, some old Spanish ruins hunters, others prospectors, some Bigfooters, and all sorts. I never made it out, but I did listen to several videos he put out on YouTube. I think he does great work sharing the old stories, oftentimes from first-hand accounts, living elders that are ready to share what they know. And here I made a small presentation at the end of one of my last videos, only to find that somebody had gone out and presented a fascinating theory along the lines of what I would have liked to share. Of course, not exactly, but along those lines of a sophisticated past civilization existing in the Americas, and even more excitingly for me, in my neighborhood. He tells his story, how he always asked questions in his youth and wasn't very popular for it. He begins with the Roman artifacts found in Tucson, Arizona, in a caliche deposit. In our community, we would call this a mudflood deposit. A layer that had hardened, coating everything with lime and acting as a concrete. He says a group of 30 artifacts were unearthed from the caliche deposit near Tucson, Arizona in 1924. All the good stuff coming in these early time periods, again similar to the ruins in the Grand Canyon having an Egyptian root. Had not the private sector been deeply involved with this discovery, I doubt we'd ever heard of them. What does this have to do with northeastern Utah? Written upon these artifacts was found the story of Roman colonies having arrived here at the time of the known rise of the Western Roman Empire in 775 AD. Written upon these artifacts, the texts also speak of previous visits to the America as early as 100 BC. The people disappearing and returning to their country of origin at the fall of the Western Roman Empire around 400 AD. It leaves one thinking, what exactly is the Western Roman Empire? So very fascinating how he begins his presentation, and I'll try to leave a link of his talk at Moon Lake just recently, which is essentially this post here. Or at least that's what he was basing it off of. I think these were his notes. I have often wondered why there are certain things discovered that some put forth such a great effort to discredit, diffuse, and keep you from knowing. So clearly this guy's eyes are open, as I discovered very quickly. Now here he shows us a map, and says this map was created in 1575. 62 years after one of the first explorers, Juan Ponce de Leon, underwent his land expedition from Florida to the west, with Coronado not far behind. In 1540, from Mexico City to New Mexico of today. How did they manage to accomplish so much in a short time? And again, you'll remember my attempt at giving this speech at this very conference before I'd even seen this, and very exciting. I was talking about the same things, and I agree with him and what he's saying here. Florida to Mexico City to New Mexico, on horse, first boat, then horse, and all these great feats and accomplishments and expeditions and building of structures, as he says here, in such a short time. Where are all the documents to accommodate all the notations on these maps? Where's all the history of these places you see on this map? And that's exactly what we're always doing, just looking at these little castles in places where in modern times there are not castles, and simply appearing to have civilization. And if it was just Native Americans, we wouldn't depict these castles as we do. And again, he's really following our path without even knowing of our research in this community. He's going down the same trail, here discovering that California is recorded as an island. Why? The academics claim it was a mistake. But what they don't tell you is that prior to a cataclysmic event 2,000 years ago, in his research, much of California was in fact an island. But how did these Spanish cartographers know that? So very fascinating. I've reached out to him via Facebook and asked for an interview or just a chat. But nonetheless, he's given us very interesting things to check out here on his blog. On this map, the Gulf of California extends all the way to modern-day Las Vegas. They want to tell us in science that this happened 250 million years ago, but he says it likely happened a mere 1,100 years ago. And we always speak of our missing 1,000 years in time. The Colorado Plateau uplift is an event which is documented by several different cultures. One of the many cultures that have come here in the past, people known today as Altai-Mongolian, Hebrew, Chinese, the Indians of India, Indo-Greeks, Welsh, Scots, French, Portuguese, and Romans. Not just the Spanish, but of those in AD times. Why do they all seem to be looking for the same place? And very interesting. Again, the victors write history, but he makes an excellent point as we have many accounts of all these different people visiting the Americas, including Vikings. A certain place that appears on several maps is called Septimania, with a lake named Coppola, surrounded by 7 cities. Again, if you remember my video where we showed an old map of Salt Lake City, or what I thought was Salt Lake City, and it said in a part of the map that there were 7 noble cities surrounding this lake, surrounded by dozens of smaller cities. And this sounded like a major hub of the old world. Lake named Coppola in a land called Calulus or Calicus. And I think this could be the Lake Conibus, once again, that we've looked at. And then he starts talking about this area here, the basin, a place on the south flank of the Uinta Mountains. And he further begins talking about how people may have arrived here after the flood and the building of boats and past civilization in this area, which even to this day is pretty remote. And he says within 40 miles of where we sit is over 100 mine locations, at least 13 cache sites, and several other things. Approximately 800 yards from here is an old Spanish mine which was blasted shut sometime after the Moon Lake Dam reconstruction project in 1938. And here is a little map. 1,600 yards from here is where the famous Dawn foot writings were found, which no longer exist and I believe have been intentionally destroyed. Roughly 650 yards from here is located one of the most famous mines in the Uintas, known as the Sacred Mine of the Utes, also known as the Church Mine, and some call it the Rhodes Mine. And this Rhodes Mine is a big attraction for prospectors in this area. About 1.8 miles from here is one of the larger mining projects of the past, but certainly it's not the largest in the Uintas, and it is the primary reason the trail running up the west side of Moon Lake exists today. Some would have you believe the Forest Service created that trail. However, it has been here a very long time. The mine workings extend another 1.5 miles up the canyon and have been worked as far back as 1,200 years ago. And many times I've shown you the tops of these Uinta Mountains, and we've looked at the mining, what clearly looks like mining operations at 13,000 feet elevation. 13 miles from here, as the crow flies, is the largest tunnel shaft mining operation of the past. The mine dump covers 3.5 acres and is 70 feet thick. It's believed that the main tunnel travels all the way through the mountain and exits approximately 1 mile away from its mouth on the other side of the mountain. The mine is one of the most sought-after mines due to its almost unknown history. But of all the mines, it's the most lacking in information in order to find it, and its remains are hidden largely because its size is bigger than most's imagination. The mine is known as the Mina de Rey, or Mine of the King. It's believed to have been mined as far back as the days of King Hiram, the friend of King Solomon, in 900 BC. And everything up here is kings this and kings that. In fact, the largest peak in Utah is called Kings Peak, not far from this Mine of the King that goes through the entire mountain. And very refreshing to hear somebody outside of our community confirming this ancient mining and the overgrown scars of the past. And when it comes to a mine going through a mountain with no history, what else could we conclude? And here he's actually talking about these two pictures. The largest open pit mine in the Uintas, covering 160 acres. The largest man-made mine dump in Utah, rivaling the modern-day Rio Tinto and Kennecott. And he says, I assure you, this is not a landslide, and it was not made by the Spaniards. And more mining? Absolutely. Just 15 miles from here is one of the places where, beginning in 1926, Kaiser Wilhelm, the last emperor of Prussia, was buying up hundreds, if not thousands of acres at the hand of Baron von Horst. And in short, people have been coming up to this area for no other reason than prospecting. Even to this day, the biggest industry in this area is oil, big oil, drilling, ultimately a form of mining. But yet, all throughout the past, even here, the Emperor of Prussia buying up land out here. Really interesting. And this is fascinating. I didn't see this before, but he says, I won't say how far from here, but not far, are believed to be found 2 cities of ancient origin. One is believed to be one of the 7 cities on an old map showing Lake Capola. The other is noted on this map on the north side of the lake. And absolutely fascinating. And being that I live here, essentially in this lake, or ex-lake, what I can see is that these cities are the mountains now. And this biggest city, clearly depicted as the largest city on this map, is the highest point in the Uintas, as seen here. This is Kings Peak. The cities were on tops of the mountains, or were the mountains, and now the lake is gone. And everything is gone, but he says he knows where one of these cities are. Not far from Moon Lake, which is situated right about here. And that's it. It would be at the base of the Uintas. And in fact, I think this Lake Capola may have actually been much larger at one point, circling around the Uinta Mountains, all the way into Wyoming. And when we see the old depictions of Lake Conibus, we see a city in the middle of the lake, and I think that this city would have been it. And here we've also seen this depiction on maps, and in fact, there was access, perhaps canal access from a past civilization that actually connected to the Mississippi in older maps. And here we can see that this same lake was actually branching off into Colorado, seeming very artificial in a lot of the older maps. Wow. Approximately 21 miles from here is located two Roman vaults, rediscovered by Antonio Espejo in 1584 and 1588. So here I guess these Roman vaults must be marked on this map. And 2 miles from here is the most important location in the Uintas. And let's just say it's not White Rocks or Rock Creek. Here's the road I think that he was talking about at Moon Lake. Thomas Rhodes was quoted as saying, "There's a certain formation in which geologists would not consider, and if you can find out this formation, you can follow it through the Uintas from mine to mine." And certainly don't take my word for it, but this statement I attest is true. And here he even shows us a picture of the formation, and seeming like this is actually an old road. And perhaps that's why it's called the Rhodes Mine, and they've just changed the name to trick us. Rhodes with an H, but rather it's just the Rhodes Mine, just as he is quoted as saying. Absolutely fascinating. And this really does look like a perfect road. I wish I could zoom in on this a little better. Now I'd like to leave you with something to ponder, and this is applicable to the very most important thing about this place. Atlantis. Boom! So this is a new map to me. Have you seen America depicted with these words on it before? Atlan. We have heard from the writings of Plato a place called Atlantis, with tis being a suffix giving ownership, in that you or something are from Atlan, or of Atlan. We know the legendary King Arthur frequented some distant island called Aflon, or as the academics have come to spell it, Avalon. However, the Welsh have no Z or V in their alphabet. King Arthur requested he be buried at this island of Aflon. We know his great-great-grandsons, up to 750 years later, followed in his footsteps. Were they simply following a very old trail? We know the Aztec left a certain place in the north they call Aztlan, which was a place of 7 cities surrounding a lake. It has also been referred to as Turtle Island by other tribes, because it looked like a turtle. And he says this area was breeding grounds for a giant turtle, a sea turtle. And he says those of you who live in the basin can attest to the many seashells and sea turtle shells in the area. And it's true, I can attest to this. I have rocks all over my land with fossilized imprints of ocean life. And perhaps I'll have to show that in a upcoming video. And he goes on to tie this into the Garden of Eden, sounding almost like a Mount Meru. There was a large source of water that breached the surface and formed 4 heads. And he says, I've been able to discover one applicable place on the planet, the Uinta Mountains. Some might consider a lonely word in an often disregarded or ignored book. And that's all I have to share this week. I thank you all for joining me, and do have a blessed day. Please like, comment, and subscribe.